I believe that we as an agency and we as a nation can be both pro-energy and jobs and pro-environment, that we don't have to choose between the two. I think our nation has done better than any nation in the world at making sure that we do the job of protecting our natural resources and protecting our environment while also respecting the economic growth and jobs our nation seeks to have.
All right, EPA Chief Scott Pruitt now in place and addressing some of the troops. Many of them were rebelling against him and urging senators to vote against him, but he is now their boss. But a lot of them, of course, stayed through one administration after another, so they're not going anywhere. But again, this is an administrator who says that he has a different idea what the EPA should be doing, and it isn't what a lot of them think he should be doing. So some of the rollback in those regulations might be easier said than done within the organization itself. We've got ClimateDepot.com founder Marc Morano, who welcomes this initiative, former Obama EPA staffer and liaison Dan Kennedy, who, well, I guess, Dan, you do not, right? What do you think?
No, I don't. I think the approach they're taking is actually the one-size-fits-all approach that's often decried on the right. You know, regulations are an easy thing to bat around like a piñata politically. But the reality is we're not talking about usually the regulations that are outdated and perhaps, you know, a little rusty at this point that need some tweaking and modifications.
Do we ever do that, though? Do you know if we've ever had regulations that applied to industries or others that existed or were vibrant years ago that don't apply today? Do we ever get rid of those?
Sure, they happen all the time. In fact, in 2011, the President Obama issued an EO that required agencies to look at cost-benefit, whether there are alternatives to regulation.
Did they do that? Did they actually remove some?
They sure did, and they also modified others and made them more applicable to today's standards. By the way, when you do that, that stacks up as another regulation and becomes part of the data of how many regulations there were in a given year. But even with that, Neil, there were 500 fewer regulations in the Federal Register annually under Barack Obama than George Bush. We're not talking about these kind of things. We're talking about the big industry fights where they're protecting polluters over people.
At an increased rate or 500 fewer net?
500 fewer every year in the Federal Register.
All right, Mark, what do you make of that then? Then this guy is pouncing too soon and maybe not aware, and maybe the EPA is doing all good.
Well, I wasn't aware of Obama being the great deregulator. In fact, with the Clean Air implementation, the previous three presidents, both Bush's and Clinton, amounted to 5 Clean Air implementations on the states. Obama did 56. Meanwhile, 40% of the country still wasn't in attainment. It's almost like the more the plans fail, the more they kept planning and passing more regulations. What Scott Pruitt really represents, and you see my smile here, this is the end of superstition in Washington, and it's actually going back to science and actual cost-benefit analysis. It's very simple. The EPA climate plan is the signature Obama executive order. He couldn't get it through Congress, so he did it. He bypassed democracy. But this plan wouldn't even impact global CO2 levels, let alone global temperature or storms, yet Obama administration officials like John Podesta actually sold it as a way to prevent storms, and we need this because the storms are getting worse.
I understand that, Mark, but do you fear that it could go, the pendulum could swing the other way? Let's say you had an EPA that was too protective of environmental interests and all of that at the expense of business, and now you have a guy who comes in who presumably would be much more inclined to ally himself with business than give a hoot about the environment.
No, it's not going to go the other way, because what Scott Pruitt's whole agenda is going to be returning stuff and working with the states, using the model of federalism, not imposing this all on the states. And this is where President Obama just kept passing the regulations. All this was done, again, through executive order. So Donald Trump and Pruitt have an easier job in the sense that this isn't like Obamacare, where you've got to get Congress to pass repeal legislation and the president sign it. This is just a matter of starting the executive orders, overturning them, and then going through layers of bureaucracy, court cases. It's going to take weeks, months, even years to get some of these overturned.
Let's see how that goes. But
I don't think they can go too far.
Where do you see the edict being of the Environmental Protection Agency? Do you think that it is veered a little bit from its original purpose to protect the environment to clubbing business? Because a lot of business guys, whether they're getting the wrong image or not, they recoil at the thought of EPA rules and regulations that they say are knee-jerk anti-business measures that are not weighed carefully on their industries or their workers. What do you say?
Sure. Well, I think there's a healthy debate, Neil, on this stuff, and there's a check and a balance. And there are oftentimes a place where an approach in Washington is going to work differently or less well in localities. And again, I'll say, sometimes one size fits all is the critique. Sometimes too complex is the critique. And complexity is the solution to not making it one size fits all. I do think debates about how regulations can be applied are healthy. And there are ways to do it well, and there are ways to do it that are ham-fisted and not going to be effective. But I think the idea that we just tar everything as a one-size-fits-all approach fixing regulations, Mr. Trump's, we're going to kill 2 for every 1 we create, is not practical, and it's going to mean you're not going to be able to fix some of the things that do need fixing. And I do want to make one point about the Clean Air Act, if I could, Neil, since Mark brought it up. Since the Clean Air Act passed, there has been a 70% reduction in air pollutants in this country, while the gross domestic product increased by 250%. Yep. I do agree with the rhetoric. You can have a healthy economy and strong regulations.
Mark, quick
and
reaction
we need to do
that?
Well, the quick answer to that is we're talking technology. If you want to rescind Al Gore's Nobel Prize, give it to fracking industry. They're the ones that have actually had the greatest effect. U.S. emissions now are at 25-year low in the first half of 2016 due to fracking taking over for coal. It's technology and new ways of doing it, not the heavy hand of regulation.
Guys,
well, then, Mark, I would assume that Mark is going to then really support the rule that will limit the emissions pumped out by natural gas companies that are wasting $330 million a year.
CO2 emissions aren't bad. I was being illustrative there.
Do not get me started on CO2 emissions. Guys, you very eloquently argued your respective points of view.